through a few brief points because he are the experts up here, and we want to get to your questions. So, briefly, elections matter, don't they? Elections matter. During my campaign last year, I didn't think there was a more important issue than this. Repealing Obamacare and saving this country from all the destruction this one piece of legislation is going to do is imperative. I must have hosted 30-some town halls during the campaign only on this issue. That's where I first met Mr. Tucker. Nothing more important. It was sort of, when Congress passed this thing last year, that was sort of the final straw that really set us off. This movement of people that had just had it. And I can tell you, let me just give you a perspective on sort of the politics of this. I don't care who your Republican nominee is. I don't care if it's Romney, Perry, Bachmann, Christie, Tucker, doesn't matter. Pick the name. Kane, thank you. Kane, Gingrich, Santorum. I don't want to leave anybody out. Does not matter. In this regard, whoever that Republican nominee is, that first month after that Republican president is sworn in, he or she is going to repeal Obamacare in a nanosecond. And if Romney or Perry or Kane or Gingrich or Bachmann or Santorum, if any of them start to wiggle and get soft next January in 2013, every single member of Congress is going to march to the White House to make sure it's done. It is singularly why a lot of us ran. It was one of the first votes I made in January was to repeal this thing. I'm asked all the time what Congress should be doing right now when it comes to Obamacare. And I don't run the House. I'm not a boss. I'm just a naive little freshman. If it were up to me, we'd be voting every single week to repeal Obamacare. We would have been doing that since January. If it were up to me, Congress, again, with that vote every single week or month that we're in session, we should be voting to repeal Obamacare. We should be putting a huge spotlight on this issue. I know we've held a number of hearings. We will continue to hold hearings looking at every single destructive aspect of this law. It's part of our job, but that's not enough. How many average, everyday Americans really pay attention to congressional hearings? Not many. We need to do a better job of this. We need to let the American people know, as these two gentlemen know, that unless this thing's repealed, that whole notion of the family doc, that whole notion of your private physician, that's gone. They will be like the dinosaurs within 7 to 8 years. Insurance companies, gone within 10 years. Don't kid yourself. Elections matter. This president won 3 years ago. The Democrats controlled that town 3 and 2 years ago. There were things they wanted to do. This was part of what they wanted to do. Their end game, folks, is to have every single American dependent upon government for their health care. Period. Don't think it's anything less than that because it's not. Steve mentioned defunding. One thing Congress should do until we get that next president is deny every nickel for the implementation of every aspect of this bill. It is amazing. And I don't know, Steve, what's the number? How many waivers so far?
There are 3.1 million Americans waived.
3.1 million Americans. I was going to say 16 to 1,700 organizations or corporations have already, I mean, just think about that, folks. President Obama said this is the greatest piece of healthcare legislation since Medicare and Medicaid in the 60s. If it's so great, why do so many people need to be exempted from it? Every single week since this thing's passed, we've learned something bad about it. We talked about how bad that 2,100-page piece of legislation was. I think the book of regulations is about 6,000 pages and growing. And again, we don't pay as much attention to that as we should. Let me close with this. Here's the real problem. The real fiscal problem in this country, the real funding problem in this country is this. More and more and more and more and more, I'll say more one more time, and more Americans are living longer and longer and longer and longer. That is a very good thing. But shame on us as a country, because we have not had the conversation as to how we are going to pay for that health care for more and more and more of us living longer and longer. We have to have that discussion, because this president is just going to voice an answer upon us. That's what he's done. And there are really only two ways to go. Either we put it all on government. We move in that direction. We make government more responsible for paying for all of that health care. And we know what that means. That means us. Or we have an adult conversation and we begin to turn the wheel and make each of us more responsible for our own health care costs. Politicians hate to talk about that. They hate to say anything about Medicare and you got to be more responsible for your own costs. But the bottom line right now, folks, is when you look at the fact that right now this country is falling off a fiscal cliff. We are bankrupting our kids and our grandkids. You can get rid of the Defense Department, get rid of those big bad oil subsidies, abolish the Federal Department of Education, which is something I'd love to do. You can do... There are 133 things we all could think of to cut when it comes to government. But you will not change the path we're on. You will not change the path we're on until you answer that question. How are we going to pay for health care for all of these Americans living longer and longer? That is the biggest and fastest growing piece of the federal pie. And we have to have a mature conversation. All your Congress is going to do for the next year is just sort of go like this. Stop this president wherever we can. Don't give him a dime wherever we can. Let the American people know how bad this legislation is. And folks, elections matter. You may not love who your Republican nominee is going to be next year, but we have to get this president out of the White House.